friends, I'm Valeria from Chase and Paper. Welcome back to my channel. First of all, let me begin by saying a huge thank you to each and every one of you. I am absolutely amazed and blown away by all the love and interest that you have shown to my last video. And you guys are amazing. I learn from you every single day. And I love hearing from you and reading all your comments. So please keep them coming. And I can see that there is a lot of interest in using freezer paper, and a lot of you mentioned that you are going to go ahead and buy a roll. So I hope you didn't put that roll away just yet, because today I have two fun projects to share with you. We are going to make two types of junk journals with old sewing patterns and freezer paper. And these are really fun and easy to make. And in a moment, I'm going to show you exactly what they look like. But before we begin, please make sure to give my video a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and share this video with a friend or two. Thank you so very much. Now let's take a look. So this first journal is a classic junk journal that opens up like a classic book. It has a removable closure. The cover is made with a vintage sewing pattern, which was strengthened with freezer paper and lined with fabric. Now this journal is not fully embellished yet, but I'm just going to give you a very quick look to show you that this is a classic one signature journal with about 18 pages or so. And you can make it as thick as you'd like. And with this journal, you may have noticed I used my sewing machine and stitched it all around the edge. This step is completely optional, and you do not need to have a sewing machine to do this project. This is very easy and very beginner friendly. Now, our second journal has a different type of cover. It's a fold over cover. It has this lovely vintage button on the closure. Inside, it has a one signature, which is not quite embellished yet, but you can put any pages, use any papers you like. And of course, you can use the pieces of sewing patterns to embellish within and make collages and pockets and tuck spots. And we're gonna go over all that. So the main difference is in the structure, in the type of cover with the fold over part. And this cover is not made with the full envelope from your pattern. It is actually made with sewing pattern tissue, which we are going to mount onto the freezer paper. And we are going to go through this process in a moment. But again, please notice this one does not have any stitching around the edge. So again, you don't have to have your sewing machine. You don't have to use it. Also, a really easy project, a lot of fun, and I bet you're going to have lots of ideas rolling by the time you're done watching this video. Ready to see exactly how it's done? Great, let's begin! Here I have a few sewing patterns, and all these sewing patterns have two things in common. First of all, yes, they are all vintage patterns. Some of them are obviously older, and this one is from the 1990s. Isn't it wild to think of the 1990s as vintage? Ooh. It is wild to me. And the second thing they have in common is that, sadly, they're all missing pieces. And so they're no longer usable. You cannot use them to make clothes. Now, did you know that some sewing patterns are actually worth quite a bit of money? So maybe you did pay 25 cents for it at the yard sale, just like I did. But before you cut into your pattern, do yourself a favor and check eBay or Etsy or just Google it, just to make sure that you are not ruining some really valuable sewing patterns, which might be worth hundreds of dollars. Great, so let's go ahead and start working with this pattern. Now, as you can see, this is very old and very fragile, and it's just about to fall apart. We're going to go ahead and challenge ourselves to make something really pretty out of this one and salvage it. I cut off the flap. I'm not throwing it out. I might be able to use it later on. I'm going to cut a tiny little sliver off on the bottom. And don't worry if your cuts are not perfect, because we are going to have a chance to fix them later on. And now we're going to cut it open on this side. Our pattern is open. And yes, it really is in a rough shape and even has a little hole on the front. So let's work with it. Now I'm setting up my ironing station, and what I have here is just a thin cotton napkin to protect my countertop from both the heat from the hot iron and from transferring all that plastic coating from the freezer paper onto my counter. Now, another important thing I wanted to mention is please work in a well-ventilated area. My window is open and I'm enjoying a nice fresh breeze. If your sewing pattern is really wrinkled and has creases all over, kind of like this one does, it's not a bad idea to run a hot iron over it a couple of times just to straighten it out. It looks a lot better already. Now let's go ahead and get our freezer paper. I'm going to tear a sheet big enough to fit my pattern. Next, I'm going to use a sheet of parchment paper. Now, I'm going to open my freezer paper with the shiny side facing up. And I'm going to place my pattern right on top with the picture facing us. And now I'm going to cover it with a sheet of parchment paper. And the reason we need this parchment paper is to protect our iron from plastic coating coming off on it. Now my iron is nice and hot. It's set to linen, which is the hottest setting on my iron. And I'm going to go over the entire area very slowly. I'm making sure to spend enough time in each section of my pattern. Especially pay attention to the edges. Now, as you can see, nothing sticks to the parchment paper, which is exactly why we're using it. The pattern is starting to fuse to our freezer paper. Let's flip it over and go over the other side. Now we're going over the back side to help the plastic melt. I'm going to put it aside and let it cool. Meanwhile, let's go ahead and prep some of that sewing pattern tissue. Again, I'm putting my freezer paper shiny side up, and I'm going to open my tissue paper and find which part I want to fuse to the freezer paper. So I'm placing my tissue paper with the print facing me. And again, covering it up with parchment paper. And going over it with my hot iron. Moving down this way. Flipping it over. And going over the back side. And we are all set. I hope you can see it. It has kind of a bit of a wrinkly texture. Very beautiful and unique. So now I'm going to put this aside to cool, and I'm going to fuse a couple more pieces of tissue off camera. Our pattern is nice and cool, and we can go ahead and cut it out. So now is the good time to fix our edges to make sure they're straight and perfect. And you can use your scissors or your paper cutter. So now our pattern is fully reinforced and it has a lot more integrity. But it's not strong enough to be a junk journal cover just yet. So I'm going to go ahead and line it with fabric. And this is the fabric I chose from my stash. And I'm marking my fabric just a tiny little bit bigger than my sewing pattern, because I want my fabric to be peeking out just tiny little bit from inside the cover when the journal is closed. And now I'm going to use my pinking shears to cut out the shape. Our lining is cut out. Let's check the fit. It's a perfect fit. So now let's go ahead and attach the lining to our cover. I'm going to use Fabrifix glue. Going to start on this side, and I'm placing it right here. At this point, I had glued the entire piece of lining onto my sewing pattern and I let it dry. So next, I'm going to take it to my sewing machine and run a simple stitch all around my edges. This step is completely optional. I stitched all around the edges with my sewing machine. Now let's go ahead and fold it in half. And our cover is completely ready. Let's go ahead and add our pages. Here I have a stack of papers that I'm going to add to the journal. I'm going to fold each page in half and possibly cut down or fold down as needed. And then I'm going to put them all together to create a signature. My signature is now ready. I have 18 pages folded in half, and they all put in together in the order that I like. And now we are ready to stitch this signature in. We are going to use a 3-hole pamphlet stitch method. And once we made sure that our pages are exactly where they are supposed to be, I'm going to go ahead and get my awl, and I'm opening my signature in the center. So find somewhere around your center, in the middle, and we're going to poke a hole through the cover and through all the pages at the same time. There we are. Now I'm going up and I'm poking the second hole. And I'm poking a third hole right here. Now I'm going to use my waxed linen thread in a black color. I'm going to need about 2.5 lengths. 1, 2.5. I'm gonna go ahead and thread a big needle. And we are going to start in our middle hole on the inside of this journal and all the way through. Pulling it through, but leaving a nice long tail in the center. Now I'm going to my top hole right here from the outside, and I'm putting it through, and we are pulling it through. And now I'm going to the last hole right here on the bottom, pulling it through, and finally I'm going to go into the central hole again from the outside. Now with our tails on either side of this long thread right here, we're going to pull to make it nice and tight, making sure it's tight in the back. And now 2 knots right over left and left over right. And there we have it. All the pages are stitched in. Remember the pieces of the pattern tissue that we mounted onto the freezer paper? I wanted to show you an example of how I use these in embellishing my junk journal. So I'm not going to embellish the whole entire journal on camera, but let me just show you how I would use this one piece. And you can definitely use these to make pockets, belly bands, tuck spots. So many wonderful creative possibilities. Look at the wonderful options we have for our pockets and tuck spots. I think this one would make a fabulous tuck spot. Let's use this one. I'm going to go ahead and snip the corner off. And this is going to be an L-shaped tuck spot. So I'm going to put the glue on these 2 sides. And I'm just going to place it down. And there you have it. Now we have a perfect little tuck spot. Let's go ahead and put in this fun vintage advertisement that I clipped from a vintage magazine. You see, one of the things I love about these sewing pattern junk journals is that you don't have to go with the sewing theme at all. You can just go with the retro theme, vintage, mid-century, so many options. So this is the theme I'm going with. I'm kind of rolling with fashion and retro and vintage nostalgia. Now, before we move on to making the closure, I want to cover up that little hole. If you remember, we had a little hole on our pattern cover. I'm going to cover it up with this little price piece from the flap on the envelope. Perfect. The hole is patched up. And now all we have to do is add the closure. I'm going to make a fully detached wraparound closure. I'm going to need about 42 inches of ribbon, but you may need more or less depending on how wide your journal is and how thick you're making it. Before I wrap my ribbon around the journal, I'm going to add a little fun element. I had this set of Tim Holtz quad chips, and I picked a piece that says salvaged. I think this is perfect for our journal because we salvaged this sewing pattern. I went ahead and I punched 2 holes with my hole puncher. So I'm going to go in from the front, pull it through, and then feed it from the back like this. And this is what it looks like. And I'm going to push it closer to the end of my ribbon on this side, and I'm going to leave about 10 inches. And I am going to wrap around the journal like this, once, twice. And now I'm going to tie a little bow. And our closure is complete. But I decided to go ahead and add one more little fun element. I made this tiny little cluster, and I used this garment pin right here. And I attached this cute little blue vintage button that I had, and a couple of pieces of tape measure ribbon, and a little fabric swatch. This is the same fabric we used for our lining. And I made this fun little charm. This is just a little piece that I cut out from the instructions that came with the sewing pattern, and I mounted this piece onto a cereal box. And then I just cut it out to make this fun little addition to the cluster. And now let's go ahead and attach this pin. And there we go. Our journal is complete. Next, we are going to work with a sewing pattern that is less than perfect. Maybe it's oriented differently and you don't want to use that as a cover, or maybe it has stamps or barcodes. For example, I'm not happy with the look of this envelope as is, and though I could fix it, I really want to use it as an opportunity to show you how to use a pattern that you might have on hand and do a slightly different project. So instead of using the entire envelope for the cover like we did before, we are going to cut out the lovely ladies on the front and use them to decorate our junk journal cover. And I'm going to go ahead and cut them out. Next, I'm going to use a manila folder as a base of our journal cover. Half of this manila folder is more than enough. I'm going to fold it to the width that I like, and then I'm going to clean up the edges. So I want it to be about this wide, which is about 4 inches. And I want my right flap to be about, this is too wide, so maybe just about 2 inches wide. Now I'm going to cut my bottom and my top. And so here's our base. It measures about 8¼ inches tall and 4¼ inches wide. Now let's go ahead and pretty it up. So here's our sewing pattern tissue, which we've used onto the freezer paper. So now it has some good integrity. And we are going to use this tissue to wrap around our cover. So first of all, I'm going to begin by cutting it out roughly. Now let's see what the best placement would be for this paper. Which part are we going to wrap around the cover? And so we can definitely do it this way. We have enough paper to go around. Now you can use Mod Podge or any kind of your favorite glue to attach this freezer paper onto the manila folder. I'm going to use my favorite Scotch glue stick because it's really strong and it's not as messy as Mod Podge. It dries pretty fast, so we want to work fast. And we flip it over and put it down and stick it down. Now I'm cutting in little corners around each corner to make our wraparound process easier. Let's add the glue on each white margin here. And I'm folding it on itself. And on this side, so here's our cover so far, and now we need to line it on the inside. And for this journal, I am going to line it with scrapbooking paper. I chose this piece of scrapbooking paper for the lining, and I was drawing my inspiration from their floral prints on their dresses. I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to put my cover right on top. And I'm just going to mark where my cover ends. But I'm going to keep in mind that when I'm cutting this out, it has to be about 1/4 inch smaller on all sides. Now I'm going to go ahead and round the corners. Now we can go ahead and glue this down. Let's give it a few minutes to dry. Now that the cover is nice and dry, let's go ahead and retrain our creases. All right, looking good. And now we are ready to stitch our signature in. And here I have a beautiful variety of papers. So I'm going to cut and fold each of these pages as needed to fit into the journal. And then I'm going to put all my pages together and get ready to stitch them in. And here is my signature all put together in the order that I like. I have 17 pages here, all folded in half. Now we are ready to stitch it in. It's going to be stitched into this crease. So I actually went ahead and I used the 3-hole pamphlet stitch to stitch our pages into the journal, exactly the same way we've done for the first journal. And now that our signature is in, we are ready to move on to the next step, which is decorating the journal cover. And I used the instructions from our pattern to clip a bunch of little words and tables, and these pieces are going to help us to dress up the cover. So we're going to make a little collage. So I'm going to get started with the name of our pattern. Adding this little piece here. I want to make sure she's not covered by the flap, so I'm gonna move her to the left. And now for the right side. There she goes. And now our cover is finished, and look how pretty it turned out. And we honored an old sewing pattern which wasn't usable anymore, and we made something beautiful and usable out of it. Now let's go ahead and add a closure. We are going to need to punch a hole on this right flap of our journal cover, so I'm going to find a spot somewhere right here. And now I'm using my Crop-A-Dile to punch that hole right on my mark. And now I'm going to set a little golden eyelet. It worked really well. I'm going to cut the length of this light pink ribbon. I cut about 45 inches, which is entirely too much, but we are going to snip off the ends. Now I had this cute vintage light green button, and it is very old and a beautiful collectible button, so I thought we'll put it to a good use and use it with a vintage sewing pattern journal. This is a shank button, so I put an end of the ribbon through the shank, and now I'm just kind of pulling it through to get to the middle of the ribbon. Now I find the ends of my ribbon, and I'm going to put it through right there from the front to back, and I'm going to pull it all the way through. And now we can go ahead and wrap the ribbon around our journal. We can go ahead and wrap it around twice. We have enough ribbon for that. And then I'm gonna go down like this and wrap it around the bottom. And there we are, folks. I think it looks really pretty. Here's the front of our journal, and here's the back. And of course, I'm going to go ahead and add all sorts of pockets and embellishments inside, but the basic construction is finished. And so there we are, friends. We made 2 beautiful journals out of old vintage sewing patterns with a little magic help from freezer paper. I really like the way they both turned out. Go ahead and let me know in the comments which one is your favorite. Also, please don't forget to give this video a like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you so much for spending time with me today, and I can't wait to see you next time.